Computer. You guys can just push got it.
Got it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to screen share here. And oops. Here we go. All right, everyone can see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So like Jody had said, we're here to talk about concussions today. And again, my name is Jenna Howe, and I'm here with my business partner, Elissa Michaud. And we're going to talk to you today about post-concussion syndrome and exercise, as well as nutrition, and nutrition for both post-concussion and brain health as well. They marry themselves together. Oops, I got to move my screen a little bit. There we go. Here we are. Oops. There. Okay. So we're going to be talking about what to look for, some intervention strategies, and just some basic information in terms of what you're looking for, signs, symptoms, myths, misconceptions on that. So again, just sort of going through, we're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to talk about what is a concussion, signs and symptoms, myths and misconceptions. Exercise, does it help or hinder? Because that seems to be a huge topic of conversation these days. Nutritional strategies for post-concussion, and we'll have a Q&A for those who might have some questions about what we've talked about, and then we'll close up the webinar. So we have Elissa. Elissa is a registered massage therapist, a holistic nutritionist, and a coach. And I'll let her talk a little bit more about herself when she starts her part of the presentation. I've known Elissa now since, I don't know, 2013, 2012, 2011, somewhere in around not long after I moved to the island. So this collaboration between the two of us has been a long time coming, and we've been talking about this for years. So we're both really stoked to be here to discuss this with you all. And who am I? So my name again is Jenna Howe, Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology. I have a diploma in osteopathic manual practice, a diploma in fitness and lifestyle management, and a bunch of other treatment-related and exercise-related certifications. And I've been in the fitness, wellness, health industry since about 1995, I guess. I started my first business in 1996 in Ontario, and I've been out here in British Columbia since 2011. So what is a concussion? It seems to be that there is a lot of varying definitions of a concussion. So these are the two that I pulled that kind of match, I feel, the most ideal. From Parachute Canada, so I like to draw from Canadian information whenever I can. So a brain injury that can't be seen on routine X-rays, CT scans, or MRIs. It affects the way a person may think and remember things. It can cause a variety of symptoms, and any blow to the head, face, or neck, or a blow to the body that jars your head can cause a concussion. So part of one of the myths and misconceptions that we'll get to momentarily is that you have to be hit in the head in order to sustain a concussion. But actually, you can also be just hit from side to side, whiplash. We see this in motor vehicle accidents. I've seen it in bike accidents, hockey, you name it. Anything that might move the head around at a rapid speed can cause a concussion. And then from the CDC Injury Center, a concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury, or TBI, caused by a bump, blow, or jolt to the head or a hit to the body that causes the head and brain to move rapidly back and forth. And it seems to be, some professionals says any injury to the head is a traumatic brain injury, and there are still other professionals who will label a concussion as a mild traumatic brain injury. Neither one is, I feel, more right than the other. I think what it does is it helps people try to sort out potentially the severity of the concussion. And again, that's something that I guess some professionals still will assign a severity or a grade, but that tends to be a little bit more antiquated. So the signs and symptoms, for some people, the amount, and this isn't even a complete list, this is just your sort of average list, but signs and symptoms are dizziness, headache, blurred vision or double vision. You might have some eye pain or some visual fatigue. So if you're trying to read something or really focus on something, your eyes just get super tired. Maybe they just want to shut. Feeling sort of foggy in the head. Some people will describe it as feeling constantly hungover, that they're just always feeling hungover. Nausea and vomiting, sensitivity to light or sound. They're physically feeling slow, like they're like when you have those summer days in Southern Ontario where it's 100% humidity and you're trying to move through the air and it's just like it's like moving through mud. A lot of people will feel like that on a regular basis post-concussion. There can be issues with concentration, disrupted sleep. Ringing in the ears is very common. Anxiety, depression. There's a whole bunch of different things, as you can see here. What tends to be something to pay attention to is that for those people who may have a history of ADHD or migraines or previous vertigo, vestibular, those tend to be the symptoms that will come to the surface post-concussion. One thing to note as well is that female concussions do different than male concussions. And there can be a hormonal component to that. There could be a musculature component to that in terms of the overall neck strength. And what we do know is that for those who have dizziness as one of their first symptoms from their concussion, tend to also have a longer recovery rate. And there's a variety of different ways that you can address those symptoms as well. Oop, that went the wrong direction. Here we go. Myths and misconceptions. So a lot of times people will assume that concussion is just something that's exclusive to the sporting community. But the reality is that the highest rate of concussive injury in the civilian population is about 25%. This is American CDC 2012. Canadian statistics are pretty similar. And I would say with 20 years of working with the post-concussion population, I would say that I see about similar statistics here in clinical practice. The next highest is motor vehicle accident, or MVA. The third is being hit by a moving or stationary object. What we see there is really tall people hitting their head going down a set of stairs. So the stairwell that comes down, hitting your head on a freezer door. I've done that. I've hit my head walking into a steel pole, which is quite ironic, but anyway, it's a funny story for maybe another time. Lots of cupboards, people hitting their heads on cupboards. Gardening, so trimming trees, tree branches, those are often many types of injuries there. So those are the three highest rate of concussions that are not sport related. A must have a loss of consciousness. That's also a myth. Not everybody loses consciousness when they've had a head injury. Must be a direct hit to the head. So we've covered that already with the definition of concussion. And then something to take note of is that the symptoms of concussion are nearly identical to the symptoms of whiplash. And so oftentimes what happens is that there's this overlap between the symptoms. And from a diagnostic perspective, there's not much to tell you if it's a concussion or if it's whiplash, because the symptoms can be quite the same. So oftentimes, and certainly for myself in clinical practice, I just treat them both together. I just assume that there's a whiplash injury in there at some point, or a compressive injury. Say, for example, if somebody's had something fall on their top of their head and it compresses their spine, the muscles around the spine are going to have an effect on that as well. So it might not be a whiplash where you've been rotated quickly side to side or forward and back, but there's still going to be a neck component if something has fallen on the top of your head. So what's happening inside the brain? So we know that you're not going to get a CT scan. So if you hit your head on the cupboard, oftentimes even if you fall and hit your head on the ice or whatever it might be, you're not likely going to get a CT scan, an X-ray, or an MRI. Oftentimes, and I think it might vary from province to province, country to country, ER to ER. It might depend on just the doctor that you happen to see that day. Unless it's been a car accident or something really traumatic in that respect, you're unlikely to get a scan when you go to the ER after you've hit your head. Oftentimes they'll do some basic neurological exam just to rule out something more traumatic going on, and then they'll probably say, oh, you have a concussion, go home and rest. But what's really happening, if you can't see it on a scan, but you can feel it, what's going on there. So we have axons, which are the connections between neurons, and they can get sheared, torn, stretched, or compressed. So the brain stem is a more hard structure, and then you have the brain around the brain stem that is more gelatinous. And so if there's been a rapid force forward and back or side to side, the stem itself doesn't necessarily go very far, but the gelatinous structure will move off of the brain stem. So oftentimes the shearing or tearing of the neurons or the axons are closer to the brain stem. You can see sometimes cerebral contusion, which is just a bruising of the brain, generally in the temporal or frontal region. So as the head goes forward, the brain hits. It's a force. So there's a lot of movement between the brain and the skull. Like there's not a lot of space there, but still that action will create a bruising effect potentially. We have neurotransmitters that are sort of freaking out in the cells. So glutamate, a neurotransmitter that is toxic to brain cells at a high level. When there's been a concussion, there is immediate release post-injury, up to 50% above normal, that dumps out of the cell into the brain. Oftentimes it should regulate in about 3 to 5 minutes. That's what we'd like to see. Potassium exits the brain cells up to 400% more than normal rates. This can cause a loss of consciousness when potassium exceeds critical levels and disrupts the electrical processes. So that loss of consciousness is that immediate dumping of the potassium out of the cells at an exceptionally high rate. The body can't deal with it very, very efficiently in that manner. And there's a loss of consciousness. And this usually regulates in about 20 minutes. Then we have calcium that enters into the brain cell up to 500%, more than normal. And this has an extremely close effect on blood flow to the brain. This should regulate in about 3 days. And then blood flow decreases up to 50%. So we've got this calcium that enters the brain cell, the potassium is dumping out of the brain cell, glutamate is dumping out of the brain cell. And so this will decrease the blood flow up to 50% within the first 2 minutes of injury. This is where it can take about a week to regulate. Now, what happens when these things don't, when these neurotransmitters don't regulate, is when you start getting into post-concussion syndrome. So in that time, your brain is working overtime to try and regulate and sort itself out. It's trying to find its homeostasis again. So there's a hypermetabolism to restore the chemical imbalance. And so there's less oxygen and less glucose due to the reduced blood flow. And this can last a day or longer. And then hypometabolism happens until the blood flow is restored, which is about 5 to 10 days later. So typically then what happens is that if you have an injury, You have to wait about 10 days before you're considered post-concussion, because it might take up to 5 to 10 days for your body to regulate and come back to homeostasis. And what Elissa and I are talking about today is things that you can do to sort of help to expedite that process as well. So what can you do right in the beginning stages so that we give our bodies and our brains the best chance of coming back to homeostasis? So with exercise, does it help or hinder? Typically, and there's still lots of physicians who will tell people just to go home and rest, do nothing. It'll sort itself out. Don't even worry about it. And now the research is showing that after about 24 to 72 hours of complete cognitive and physical rest, you need to start bringing movement back in within tolerance. And there's a variety of different ways to monitor that exercise, Parkwood pacing. I meant to provide the document, so you can remind me, I can send that to Jody after. Will give you ways to monitor your overall energy expenditure. Essentially, I'm very symptom-based with my clients. So I want to know, well, what activities can you do that does not increase your symptomology? Okay, so maybe for some people, it's cycling, for some people it's running, some people it's very dependent on the individual. And so from that perspective, we need, as we talked before, blood flow is an issue post-injury. We need to make sure that the body and the brain are getting adequate amounts of oxygen and glucose. So we need proper nutrition, but we also need that exercise bit. It's just about making sure that you're finding what your tolerance level is. So I don't want people to push themselves into the red zone, but I do want people to sort of bump themselves up. Like, what is my maximum threshold? Is it 20 minutes of a moderate walk? Is it 50 minutes of a low level walk? And then you're going to stay there until symptoms are normalized. And then we add a little bit more intensity to that, a monitor, we see what's happening. The usual thing at most conservative physiotherapy clinics are going to put you on a treadmill. They're going to do what's called the Bruce treadmill test to identify your ideal heart rate within that. And that can be really great for some people, but the majority of clients that I've worked with, that hasn't been particularly useful. What we tend to do is work more on subjective symptoms. How are you feeling today? How did it feel tomorrow and the next day? But the goal here is that blood flow is crucial, and you don't want to push it too hard, but you don't want to do absolutely nothing either. And it doesn't necessarily matter what the activity is. I have clients who are athletes. I have clients who they're recreational cyclers. They do yoga or they teach yoga. Whatever activity is ideal for you is the activity that you're going to go for, and not to worry too much about what that's going to look like. I've had some clients who could only walk, say, 100 meters, and all of their symptoms came back. They would have to come back to their house and then lay down for a couple of hours. I've had people who could cycle for 50 kilometers a day, but going into work was really symptom provoking. So it's about finding what your specific balance is and working with your healthcare practitioner to figure out how to work within that threshold. And so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to pass everything on over to Elissa. So I'm going to take off my screen share. I'm going to let her jump in on her screen share. So I will do that. All right.
All right, and it'll just take me a minute or two to get over to my slide and figure out what I'm doing so I can make sure that you can see what I'm looking at as well. All right. So, all right, so here we go. Thank you so much for being patient. I'll just do a really quick introduction here before we jump into some nutritional strategies for post-concussion syndrome. I've been working in the healthcare field for over 20 years. I took my first massage therapy training when I was about 30 years of age in 2000, and really enjoyed it, and began working with people who have whiplash injuries, who have brain injuries, who have concussion, stroke, and so on. So over the course of the years, I practiced massage therapy on and off, among other things. I've studied nutrition, I've studied yoga. And so, looking at ways to be able to support people with any post-concussion symptoms that they might be having, along with other health issues. And my original drive from this came from, I had 3 injuries, as Jenna was talking about earlier in her presentation. You can have, a direct blow to the head, or you might have a whiplash. So I had 2 direct blows to the head. One accident when I was, I think, around 11 or 12. Another one when I was in my early 20s. And then in my mid 20s, I had the old T-bone motor vehicle injury accident where someone drove in front of me, and I was going quite quickly through the intersection, and then sustained more head and neck injury at that time. So it became a quest for me to be able to heal from those symptoms, because many of them dragged on for many years, even until about 10 or 12 years ago when I first met Jenna. I was actually searching for someone who could help with some lingering post-concussion symptoms, and I went to see her for various therapies, and the difference was dramatic. I was able to go from having difficulties with daily life to getting back to the gym and exercising. And so, that was really helpful. So that was our original meeting. And then we've been working on all kinds of good things since then. I'm going to jump right into my slides here. I made a lot of great slides for today. We'll see how much time we have to get through them. And whatever we don't finish, we'll be happy to upload for you later. I think that would be a good idea, so that you can take a look at any lingering information that we might not have time for today. So getting into, why is nutrition important for post-concussion syndrome recovery? So today we're going to be learning about how to support brain function, and not just for post-concussion. So a lot of these tips and tricks you'll be able to take with you into your daily life. For instance, if you haven't experienced a concussive injury, or you might be able to help other people who have brain injury or have experienced a concussion. So the injured brain often requires more fuel in the form of what we call our macros. So those are your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Sometimes it requires more calories, so just energy to be able to repair, and nutrients. So we're going to talk about vitamins and minerals, and also phytonutrients. So those are the plant-based compounds that support healing that we'll go over in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. And those really help to reduce inflammation. So we're going to be focusing a lot on that inflammatory response in the brain and what happens post-concussion. And we want to be able to repair and restore those neurons. So we've got some foods in the Western diet can lead to inflammation, and some foods can reduce it. So first, let's talk about what are some general signs of inflammation. Pain, heat, redness, swelling, and a loss of function is sort of the typical diagnosis that as a practitioner, we look at any of these things that are happening in the body. Then we look at fatigue. Potential fever can indicate inflammation, and joint pain is a really common one, which I see a lot in massage therapy and nutrition. So you've got stiffness, swollen joints, or a joint that might be warm to the touch, and a skin rash might be also a sign of inflammation. Now, when we're talking about brain inflammation, Jenna has already gone over a lot of those symptoms: brain fog, feeling of slow and fuzzy thinking. Depression and anxiety can also be symptoms of brain inflammation. Issues with vision, migraines, headaches, even sort of personality issues, feeling irritable more than normal, anger, rage is a common sort of sign of brain inflammation following concussion. Then you've got dizziness, tinnitus, memory loss, and fatigue. So we'll talk first a little bit about protein. So everybody's body's needs are different. However, there are some really good basic guidelines to follow. Increasing or getting the right amount of protein is quite easy if you're used to eating a reasonable amount of food and regular meals and snacks. For someone, for instance, who's lost their appetite or they have a nausea following brain injury, it might be difficult to eat. So, the challenge is to be able to get an adequate amount of food in without causing too much GI distress or upset. It also might be hard for some due to, for instance, dietary restrictions and kidney issues. For instance, a doctor says, okay, we want you to limit your protein because you've got some kidney dysfunction going on. So you want to limit your protein to a certain amount. Also difficult when you have disordered eating, which is quite common in today's sort of society with all of the busyness that goes on. We're very much a grab and go type of lifestyle, or I'm not hungry now, so I'll eat later, rather than regular meals at regular intervals. And also people with, anorexias or bulimias or different types of disordered eating issues or fear of food, that sort of thing. Also overeating would be the opposite end of the spectrum from that. So the formula that we're going to use is 0.8 to 1 gram of protein for every lean pound of body weight. So an example here is, say you have a 25% body fat ratio, and this can be measured often at a gym or at your doctor. You want to deduct 25% of your body weight. So say you weigh 150 pounds, you would take 75% of that, which would give you 112 grams of protein. So you could range between 112, which would be your 0.8, and 1 gram, so slightly higher. Now, it sounds like a lot of protein to get into the diet, but if you look at some examples from, and here is a typical Western diet, you've got a 4-ounce piece of steak and 1 egg or 1 5-ounce piece of salmon. That's going to give you about 30 grams of protein. And so is a burrito with 2 eggs and a 1/4 cup of black beans. You've got a cup of Greek yogurt with some sliced almonds in there, maybe a 1/4 cup of sliced almonds, 3 eggs, 2 ounces of sausage, and 1 ounce of goat cheese would give you that 30 grams first thing in the morning. Or a smoothie with some Greek yogurt, 2 teaspoons of peanut butter, and a tablespoon of chia seeds. And that might be for the person that either doesn't really enjoy a morning breakfast or has difficulty with nausea and other digestive symptoms. So you want to be able to get 30 grams of protein within 1 hour of waking up. That helps to stabilize your blood sugar, which is really important. And we'll be talking about that more in a minute. About 15 grams at your mid-morning snack, another 30 at lunch, 15 at your afternoon snack, and 30 at dinner. And that would be based on your 150 pound weight with approximately 25% body fat. So one of the things that we're going to talk about next has to do with carbohydrate. It can be a very charged topic of conversation for some. So balancing blood sugar is really critical for brain health. Your brain cells, recovering brain cells, are using either glucose or ketones. And we won't get into ketones at the moment, but we'll just stick with glucose. The brain only weighs 2% of your entire body weight, but it consumes 20% of the glucose. And ketones are fuel that are produced in the liver from fat. The brain can become insulin resistant, which means it's unable to take up glucose. This might happen immediately following post-concussion or later on with post-concussion symptoms. And brain insulin resistance manifests as an impaired ability to be able to regulate metabolism, or it can manifest as impaired cognition and mood. If having difficulty with insulin resistance in the brain, you can supply ketones in the form of MCT oil, or a ketogenic diet can supply the brain with the energy that it requires. Oftentimes, they've found in the past that folks who have Alzheimer's definitely have issues with insulin resistance in the brain. And when they start to supplement with an MCT oil or a ketogenic diet, it really helps with cognitive function. And so is the same case with brain injury as well. So how to carb? A healthy brain with no cognitive issues and no metabolic dysfunction going on in the body. Carb consumption which should be exclusively from vegetables, and a lesser amount of fruit is recommended. That's the ideal source of carbs. So a woman who is, say, 130 to 150 pounds, you want approximately 30 grams of carb per meal, plus a lesser amount in snacks. So an idea of 30 grams of carb would be a sweet potato. For men or a taller or larger woman, looking at 150 to 180 or even up to 200 pounds, approximately 45 grams of carb per meal, and then plus a lesser amount in snacks of maybe 10 to 15 grams and your snacks in between. A note here about fructose. So excess fructose can strain the liver and lead to metabolic problems such as high triglycerides and fatty liver. And all those equal brain inflammation. So the idea, post-concussion is that you want to keep your brain inflammation to a minimum. And ideally, you'd look at about maximum 25 grams of fructose in a day. So to give you an idea of what that would look like, it would be 2 apples, or 1.5 orange, 1.5 oranges. And then keep in mind that carrots, asparagus, and other vegetables also contain fructose. So when calculating your daily fructose load, you don't want to look at just fruit, but everything combined. And there are a lot of fructose calculators online, or simple charts where you can find the information as far as how much is in each food for a measurement, either in a cup or 100 grams. Now we'll look at our other macro, which is fat. So fat is really important. It's I want to say almost the most important nutrient for the brain in terms of recovery and repair. Once you solve your glucose issues and you have enough protein going into the body, it's important for energy, cell signaling between the neurons, and building a healthy cell membrane. So a healthy cell membrane allows the good nutrients in and allows waste out. It allows the sodium potassium pump to work properly. Jenna was talking a little bit about that earlier, about potassium rushing out of the cell, and then this taking a little while to balance. So having a healthy cell membrane is really important, not just for concussion injuries, but also for an aging brain. And 70% of our brain is made of fat, and omega-3s are the essential building blocks of our brain. It's important for learning and memory, and you can find those in fatty fish, foods with high omega-3, such as grass-fed meats. So when you're looking at meat, if you're able to access grass-fed at least once in a while, that has a superior fatty acid profile to conventionally raised produce, which has a high omega-6 in comparison to an omega-3. A variety of fat is required for your cellular function optimally. So we've got extra virgin olive oil, egg yolks, butter, and just be mindful that there's a really big message that's been going on for a long time about the fat and cholesterol fear. This is harmful in its own right, and it's really important that you don't fear fat. It's required for healthy cell function, immunity, and hormones. And when you ingest something that has cholesterol in the food, only 10% of that total cholesterol is absorbed in the intestine. And that's with a fully functioning, healthy intestine with the, digestive enzymes and everything that's working in the way that it should. Mainly, our cholesterol is produced in the liver in response to inflammation and vascular inflammation. So the idea here is that when you embark on a nutrition program to be able to keep your overall total body and brain inflammatory response lower, this is going to go a long way towards helping to reduce cholesterol levels in the body. So how to with your healthy fats? So fat that are solid at room temperature are okay to cook with and heat. So you've got ghee, butter, tallow, which is animal fat, coconut oil, all of these are solid at room temperatures. And it's ideal to not cook in oil that's liquid at room temperature. So that might be your olive oil, your safflower oil, and your sesame. These oils are all highly beneficial to the body, and their structures are altered when they're heated. So get them into the body in their pure, natural state, and pour them, over salad. If you cook the meat, for instance, in an air fryer or a crock pot, you can pour them over afterwards. You want to eat plenty of fatty seafood. So you've got salmon, halibut, sardines are some example, although I know not everybody's into sardines, but salmon and halibut are pretty tasty. And if you're eating a lean meat, and say you have a lean meat and a vegetable on your plate, some broccoli, some asparagus, be sure to add about 1.5 tablespoons of fresh oil, such as olive oil or butter or sesame oil in the form of a salad dressing or something like that to your meal. And yeah, so that basically gives you the information, a little bit of information on fat, good information, good to follow. Obviously on this picture here, avocados have a lot of healthy fat in them. Sesame seeds are great. Chia seeds, walnuts, any type of nuts, they all have really great fats. And it's important to diversify your fats because each fat does something a little bit different in the body and with the cellular membrane. So having a good cross-section of that will go a long way towards healing. Here we're going to talk a little bit about fighting inflammation. So we've got our micronutrients, phytonutrients, and phytochemicals. These are thousands of naturally occurring compounds in plant foods, and they produce all the beautiful colors that you see here in this picture, your greens, your reds, purples, and they have a wide range of health benefits. So we've got antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, bacterial. They help to turn on your good genes, repair cell damage, and reduce oxidative stress and boost immune functions. Fighting free radicals is super important because there's a lot of oxidative stress that takes place with head and brain trauma. So helping to prevent cognitive decline and cell damage done by free radicals, which equals neurodegeneration and damage to the neurons. So really trying to set yourself up for success. Antioxidants, including C's and E's, as well as certain phytonutrients, they serve to neutralize those oxidative species and to protect our DNA and cells from damage. So just to give you an idea about what some of these look like. So we've got our deep red, purple, blue colors. These are cardioprotective and neuroprotective and anti-tumor. You've got your cocoa and green tea and CG, which is in green tea. There's high amounts in green and white tea, highly beneficial for cognitive impairment. You've got your oleuropein in olive oil, and that helps to counteract oxidative stress as well. But it really makes a difference on stiff brain tissue. So, it's just not functioning. Things aren't working well. It's getting a little stiffer, a little more difficult for blood to flow through, getting that good circulation through. You definitely want your first cold pressed extra virgin olive oil in a dark glass bottle. So that's important because they've actually just passed some laws recently. It was explained to me last week that a certain percentage of olive oil can now be some other type of oil. And if you're getting into your second and third press, then the benefits aren't quite as high. So looking for extra virgin olive oil, first cold press. Resveratrol, everyone's heard about this one because of wine, grapes and wine. It's great for cardiovascular benefits and also to enhance brain health. We've got the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and anti-apoptotic, that's cell death. So we want to make sure that you're preserving as many brain cells and neurons as possible. The effects are vascular function, and it increases cerebral blood flow, builds new neuronal connections. Now, just a side note on this, I'm not recommending that concussed individuals go and drink a bottle of red wine every day to enhance brain health. But the idea is that, a little bit of red wine as a supplement, as long as it's not provoking symptoms, an ounce or 2 ounces a couple of times a week. If you feel fine afterwards and not dizzy and it doesn't provoke any symptoms, then that's always a great way to get extra resveratrol. Resveratrol supplements are really popular these days, and unfortunately, none of the ones that I've been able to find are made from red wine anymore. They're made from Japanese knotweed. They say it's the same, but I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of if you have a chance to find actual resveratrol made from red wine or grapes, made from grapes, excuse me, that would be ideal. Curcumin is really popular, all the rage with people looking to reduce inflammation in the form of turmeric and curcumin supplements for both people and pets these days. It's fantastic. It protects the brain from free radicals and lipid oxidation, and also helps to prevent cognitive decline. So that kind of wraps up our real quick overview on macronutrients and some of the phytonutrients that we need to support better brain health for today. I think that Jenna and I were going to talk a little bit about our concussion nutrition and recovery program. So I'm going to pass this slide back over to Jenna, and then she can talk a little bit about what we're doing these days and what we're offering. I'll just have to stop my screen sharing first. There we go.
That's great. Thanks, Elissa. Yeah, so what we have, and we can forward the information on to Jody to share with you if it's something that you're interested in. So what Elissa and I have done is sort of brought our brains, so to speak, together to create a program that has a couple of different tiers to it. So for example, we've got one tier where we've created a workbook and a recipe book that has easy to make, easy to store, easy to freeze, nutritionally beneficial recipes, all specifically designed for brain health and post-concussion. And then the workbook helps those who are having some difficulties cognitively or with memory, whatever it might be in terms of their symptomology, to be able to actually put things together. Everyone that I've worked with over the years, the symptoms are vast in terms of what is unique to them. And so for some people, they really need a workbook that has a step-by-step structure to how to implement these foods and the recipes. And then we also have another program, sort of next level, where we have the recipe book and the workbook. And then we also have a private Facebook group where we actually do video tutorials for the people who have a challenging time with reading material because of eye tracking and visual issues. So we'll have, audio files and video files to take people through the recipes and other things like question and answers and other beneficial aspects to that. And then we also have another program where if somebody wants a little bit more specific guidance, or if they've got some other health conditions and they're not sure how to put everything together, we're doing consultations as well, where we actually together are providing the consultations. So Elissa can provide the nutritional aspects of making things a little bit more personalized, and I can talk people through, okay, so what types of interventions have you been doing, what's been working, what hasn't been working, and trying to identify maybe some therapeutic gaps that they could pull into their care plan. So if you're interested in any or all of that information, we'll pass that information on to Jody, and then she can share it with you if you're interested. And what we'd like to do now is maybe open the floor to some question and answer before we wrap up and sign off. So if anybody has any questions